Put her down. I don't care if she's the last breathing Marine on this mountain, she is not authorized for forward engagement. Those were the last words Captain Delaney spoke before 24 Navy SEALs walked into the worst ambush of the Afghan war. He was wrong about a lot of things that morning. He was most wrong about her. If you're new here, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of this story. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this one travels. This is the story they almost buried. Part 1. The woman they left behind. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Kestrel smelled like burnt coffee and old fear. That was how Maya Rodriguez had always described it to herself, not the fear of men who were afraid, but the accumulated fear of men who had learned what real danger felt like and kept showing up anyway. She respected that smell. She had earned the right to be in the same room with it. But that morning, nobody in that room was acting like she had earned anything. She stood at the back, not because she was told to stand there. Nobody had told her anything directly in 3 weeks, but because standing at the back meant she could watch all of them at once. 26 men in various stages of pre-mission preparation, and not one of them had made eye contact with her since she walked in. That was information. Maya Rodriguez had spent 9 years learning to read information that people didn't intend to give her. Captain Delaney stood at the front with his pointer and his maps and his absolute certainty, and Maya listened to every word he said and cataloged every word he got wrong. Primary insertion at 0400, Delaney said, tapping the topographic display. SEAL Team 7 takes the valley approach from the south. We've confirmed light resistance in the ridgeline sectors. Intel has enemy presence at roughly 60 fighters, disorganized, poorly equipped. This is a clean extraction. In and out before first light. Maya counted 4 errors in those 6 sentences. She did not raise her hand. Corporal Danny Reyes, standing 2 feet to her left, leaned slightly in her direction without turning his head. "You're doing the thing," he murmured. "What thing?" "The thing where your jaw gets tight and your eyes go flat and you look like you're deciding whether a person is worth the bullet." "I'm listening." "You're cataloging," Reyes said. "I've seen that look for 2 years. Every time someone with more rank than sense starts talking about terrain, they've never walked." Maya said nothing. Delaney was still talking. "Support personnel will maintain rear position at FOB perimeter. That includes..." And here he didn't say her name, he just looked at his clipboard with the particular kind of deliberateness that meant he was very consciously not looking at her, all non-designated forward personnel. Questions. There were no questions. There were never questions when Delaney ran a briefing. Questions implied that the briefing had left something unexplained, and Delaney did not believe his briefings left anything unexplained. Maya had approximately 40 questions, starting with why the Eastern Ridge wasn't being covered, and ending with what exactly light resistance meant when your source was a single informant who'd been paid in American cash and had 3 different names depending on which translator you used. But she didn't ask them. She had asked questions in this room before. She knew what happened. She walked out while the men were still gathering their gear. The Eastern Ridge had been bothering her for 11 days. She'd looked at the topographic maps the first time she was permitted into the operational planning room before Delaney had quietly made clear she wasn't welcome there anymore. She'd memorized what she saw because Maya Rodriguez had always been good at memorizing things she wasn't supposed to need. The valley the SEALs were heading into sat like a bowl between 4 granite ridge lines. 3 of those ridges were mapped, assessed, and declared either too steep for enemy positioning or already covered by coalition assets. The 4th, the eastern one, had been marked with a notation that said, "Assessed inaccessible terrain, prohibitive." Maya had looked at that notation for a long time. Then she had looked at the elevation lines. Then she had thought about the 18 months she'd spent in these mountains before she was transferred to FOB Kestrel, climbing things that maps called impossible, because sometimes impossible things had to be done. The Eastern Ridge wasn't inaccessible. It was hard. There was a difference. She was sitting outside the motor pool, her back against a concrete barrier, field stripping and reassembling her M40A6 for the 4th time that morning when Reyes found her. "They're gone," he said. "I know." Insertion was clean. Delaney's running comms from the TOC. "I know that too." Reyes crouched down in front of her, which meant he wanted her to look at him, and she did. He was 24 years old with the kind of face that looked 40 in certain lights, and right now it looked all 40 years. "What are you thinking, Maya?" I'm thinking that Valley has 4 walls and only 3 of them are being watched. That's Delaney's call to make. Well, it was Delaney's call to make 40 minutes ago, she said. Now it's a fact that has to be lived with. Reyes was quiet for a moment. You're not going to do anything stupid. I don't do stupid things. You do things that look stupid until they turn out to be the only right thing, which in my experience is actually more dangerous than regular stupid. Maya set the rifle's bolt back into position and listened to the click. Clean. Perfect. The way it always was when her hands were the ones working it. Go get some sleep, Danny. It's 0600. Then go get some coffee. She looked back at the mountains. I just need to think. He left, but she knew he didn't believe her. The radio call came in at 0917. Maya was in the secondary comms room, not the main TOC. She wasn't permitted in the main TOC without an escort since the incident with Lieutenant Garvey 2 weeks ago when the frequency crackled and the voice came through and the bottom dropped out of everything. Kestrel Base, this is SEAL 7 Actual. We are in contact. Say again, we are in heavy contact. Enemy force is substantially larger than assessed. I am counting over 150 fighters on the northern and western approaches. We have additional movement on the southern egress. We are pinned, requesting immediate air support and QRF. We have 3 wounded. The duty officer, Sergeant First Class Owusu, was already on the secondary frequency before the transmission finished. Maya stood very still and listened to everything. Delaney's voice came over the command channel 20 seconds later. 7, this is Kestrel. Air support is unavailable. All assets are committed to Bagram package, earliest ET. A is 8 hours. QRF is, a pause. QRF is assembling. Maintain position and hold your ground. 8 hours, 24 men in a bowl with 4 walls, 3 of them covered by 200 enemy fighters, and the cavalry was 8 hours away. Maya looked at the topographic display on the wall. The Eastern Ridge. 2,000 feet of granite that nobody had thought worth watching. Owusu turned from his console and saw her face. Rodriguez. Sir. This is not your. Is there a designated sniper asset available for that Eastern Ridge? She asked. The question came out flat and professional, the way she trained herself to ask questions she already knew the answer to. Owusu's expression told her everything. Both qualified snipers are in the contact zone, he said quietly. Peterson's wounded. Harlow is pinned on the western approach. Then there's no coverage on the Eastern Ridge. Rodriguez, I want to formally request authorization to take a forward position on the Eastern Ridge line for sniper support of SEAL 7's current position. She said it precisely because the words mattered, because in 9 years she had learned that words were the only armor you had inside a bureaucracy, and she was going to use every piece of it. I have qualified marksman credentials. I have operational familiarity with this mountain sector, and right now there is no one else. Owusu looked at her for a long time. He was a careful man, the kind of man who weighed things properly before he moved them, and she respected that about him even in this moment when she needed him to move faster than his nature wanted him to. He picked up the command frequency handset. Kestrel TOC. This is Owusu at secondary comms. I need Captain Delaney immediately. The wait was 40 seconds. It felt like a different kind of time. Owusu, what is it? Delaney's voice was clipped, running on adrenaline and the specific anxiety of a man whose certainty was coming apart in real time. Sir, I have Corporal Rodriguez here requesting authorization for a forward sniper position on the Eastern Ridge to support SEAL 7. She's our only available qualified asset and the ridge is uncovered. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Owusu looked at the handset to confirm the connection was still live. Put her down. Delaney's voice was iron. I don't care if she's the last breathing Marine on this mountain. She is not authorized for forward engagement. She is support personnel. Keep her where she is. The channel clicked off. Owusu set the handset down slowly. He didn't look at Maya. Maya looked at the topographic display for exactly 5 seconds. Then she picked up her rifle. Rodriguez! Owusu's voice was careful now. The voice of a man who understood exactly what was about to happen and was making a choice about how far he was going to reach to stop it. If you walk out that door without authorization. I know what happens, she said. I've always known what happens. Courts martial, insubordination. Delaney will hang you for this. 24 people are going to die in 8 hours if nobody covers that ridge. She slung the M40 over her shoulder and picked up her pack already loaded because some part of her had known this moment was coming for 11 days. You tell Delaney whatever you need to tell him, Sergeant. You tell him I went to the latrine and didn't come back. You tell him I went crazy. Tell him anything. I don't care what story you use. She was at the door when Owusu spoke again. How long for the climb? She stopped. The eastern ridge, he said quietly. How long to reach a viable shooting position? She did the math she'd been doing in her head for 11 days. Hour and 40 minutes, maybe 2 hours if the wind's fighting me on the upper section. Owusu was quiet for a moment. Then he turned back to his console. I haven't seen you since 0800, he said to the wall. You were in the motor pool, last I checked. Maya walked out the door. The mountain did not care about her reasons. That was something her first sniper instructor had told her Staff Sergeant Wicks, a lean, hard-faced woman from Alabama, who had never raised her voice in the 8 weeks Maya trained under her. The mountain doesn't know why you're climbing it, Wicks had said. The wind doesn't know you're trying to save someone. Gravity doesn't know your name. You don't get credit for good intentions out there. You get results or you get dead, and the difference is entirely up to you. Maya had been 20 years old when she heard that. She had carried it for 9 years like a coin in a pocket, something small and hard and real that her fingers found whenever she needed grounding. She found it now 200 feet up the eastern face, her fingers bleeding from a handhold she'd misjudged her pack, pulling at her shoulders like it was trying to negotiate. The wind was coming off the upper ridge line at 23, maybe 25 miles an hour, channeled between the granite faces and hitting her from angles that changed every 30 seconds. Below and to the west, she could hear the battle, not clearly distance and terrain, and wind made it a sound more felt than heard a percussion in the chest, but she could hear it. She let it tell her what she needed to know, and she kept climbing. Her radio earpiece crackled. Reyes. Maya, where are you? She didn't answer. She needed both hands. Maya, Delaney is losing his mind. Owusu told him you were in the motor pool, but someone saw you heading east. If you can hear me, a pause. The SEALs just reported a 4th wounded. They're starting to run low on ammo on the western approach. Martinez, the SEAL team leader, he got on the command channel and asked if there was any sniper asset available. Delaney told him no. Maya found the next handhold. Pulled. He told him no, Reyes said again, and his voice had something in it that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. 24 men, and Delaney told their team leader there was no asset available. She pulled herself up onto a narrow ledge and flattened her back against the rock face, breathing. From here she could see the valley floor through a gap in the ridge, and what she saw made her go still in a way that had nothing to do with the climb. The SEALs' position was a cluster of broken terrain at the valley's eastern edge, rock formations that gave partial cover, but not enough, not against the coordinated fire coming from 3 directions. She could see the dust and the muzzle flash signatures from the northern approach, could see the way the enemy was moving not randomly, but with intention, pushing systematically toward the SEAL position like they had all the time in the world and knew it. They had 200 fighters. They had the high ground on 3 sides, and they were in no hurry. That was the worst part, seeing how unhurried they were. These weren't disorganized fighters making opportunistic contact. Someone was commanding this. Someone was managing the pressure, keeping the SEALs pinned without closing for a final assault, bleeding them slowly, waiting for ammunition and morale to collapse simultaneously. That was a commander's logic. Patient, methodical, lethal. Maya looked at the distance from her current position to the viable shooting ledge she'd identified from the maps. Another 500 feet of vertical, another 40 minutes of climbing. She started climbing. She was 900 feet up when her left boot found rotten rock. She had time to understand what was happening, the particular sensation of stone that looks solid but carries nothing, the way the material compresses wrong beneath the foot, and she had enough reflex left to shift her weight before the hole gave way entirely. The rock face pulled free in a chunk the size of a dinner plate, and she hung by her right hand and her left knee, body pressed against granite rifle strap, cutting into her collarbone for what felt like an hour, but was probably 3 seconds. Below her 400 feet of open air. She breathed. Just breathed. Let her body find its own still point The way Wicks had taught her, the way 9 years of this work had made into something automatic and unglamorous and necessary. Then she found the next hold and she kept going. Her radio had gone quiet. Either Reyes had said everything he had to say, or he'd realized she wasn't answering and decided to save the battery. She was grateful for the silence. She needed to think about nothing except the rock in front of her and the distance remaining. But the sound of the battle below was getting clearer as she climbed, and by the time she reached the upper traverse, she could hear individual weapons, the rhythm of M4s on controlled bursts, the heavier and more patient sound of the enemy's PChem machine guns, the sharp crack of a sniper rifle that she recognized as Harlow's work, because she'd trained with Harlow for 6 weeks and knew his shot interval better than he did. Harlow was still fighting, but his position was wrong. She could hear it, could triangulate from sound the way some people read music. His position was pinned and he was shooting blind, managing suppression rather than creating effect. She reached the ledge at 11:42. She'd made it in an hour and 38 minutes. She went prone before she fully committed her weight to the surface rifle, out and forward, cheek to stock in one practice motion that her body performed while her mind was already doing something else entirely. From this position, she could see everything. The valley was a story told in geometry. Maya read it the way she'd learned to read everything without emotion. First facts, first emotion, later if there was time. The SEALs held a rough perimeter about 40 meters across, using 3 natural rock formations as hard cover and the spaces between them as firing lanes. 7 men on the western face, 6 on the north, the rest distributed in managing the center. She counted 4 men down, 2 immobile, 2 moving, but compromised. 3 of the remaining fighters were running dangerously low on ammunition. She could tell by the way they were shooting the careful measured intervals of men counting rounds. The enemy had organized into 3 distinct pressure elements. Northern element, roughly 60 fighters, the most disciplined, maintaining steady fire to keep heads down. Western element, about 80 fighters, the most aggressive, probing for weaknesses. And a reserve element to the south, 30 or 40 fighters, hanging back and watching, waiting to be committed at the moment of the enemy commander's choosing. She looked for the commander. This was the work. Not the shooting. The shooting was the easy part, the mechanical, final step of a long process of seeing and understanding. The hard part was the intelligence embedded in a battlefield, the reading of who was controlling what, the finding of the human mind behind the violence. She found him in 11 minutes. He was positioned on a low rock formation at the northwestern edge of the valley, slightly behind the main northern element, but with clear sight lines to both pressure forces. He moved twice during those 11 minutes, once to speak to a runner who came from the western element, once to gesture toward the south in a way that meant he was thinking about committing his reserve. He had 4 men close to him, one of whom was almost certainly a radio operator. He was patient, he was unhurried, he was managing this battle the way you manage something you were certain of winning. Maya's earpiece crackled back to life, and this time it was a voice she didn't know. Male-controlled, carrying the specific kind of exhaustion that sounded like pain, metabolized into function. All Kestrel assets, this is SEAL 7 actual. I'm going to say this once. We are at 40% ammunition on the western approach. We have 1 KIA and 4 WIA. Enemy forces between 180 and 200. We cannot hold this position for 8 hours. If anyone has any asset, any capability, any option that Kestrel Command has not already told them they can't use, I am asking you as a man, asking other people who understand what this means to use it. The frequency went quiet. Then a different voice, Delaney, tight and controlled. 7, maintain your position. Assets are being coordinated. Maya adjusted her position by 2 inches and settled her breathing. She had 31 rounds. The first shot was for the PKM gunner on the northern approach. He was the most dangerous single asset in the enemy formation. A well-positioned machine gunner could keep 6 men's heads down indefinitely, and the northern gunner had been doing exactly that for what she estimated was the last 2 hours. He'd found a natural depression in the rock that gave him excellent cover from the SEALs' firing positions below, and he was working it with the methodical competence of someone who'd done this before. He hadn't accounted for someone being 900 feet above him. Maya exhaled halfway and stopped. Her finger was already where it needed to be. She wasn't thinking about the man. She wasn't thinking about anything except the geometry, distance, elevation differential, wind from the northwest at 22 miles per hour, the barrel calculating, and her body calculating, and everything coming to a point of absolute stillness. The rifle spoke. The PKM went silent. For exactly 2 seconds, the entire valley seemed to register that something had changed. Then the northern element began looking for the source of the shot, and she was already tracking the second target, and the second shot came before the first echo had finished bouncing off the granite. The northern element's radio operator went down. Now they were blind up there, and now they were looking for a sniper, which meant they were not looking at the SEALs below them, which meant the SEALs had a window small and closing to breathe and redistribute and think. Her radio crackled. The SEAL team leader's voice, and different now, carrying something new. Kestrel, we have sniper activity from the Eastern Ridge. Please confirm, do we have an asset on the Eastern Ridge? The silence from Delaney lasted 3 full seconds. 7, that position has been assessed as inaccessible. Another pause. Then the SEAL leader, she would later learn his name was Martinez, Staff Sergeant Diego Martinez, 13 years and 3 combat deployments, said something that she thought about for a long time afterward. Well, someone forgot to tell the sniper. The enemy commander knew something had changed. She watched him processing it in real time, the cessation of the PKM fire, the loss of his radio operator, the way his head came up, and he looked toward the Eastern Ridge with the expression of a man reassessing his certainty. He spoke to the men around him. One of them pointed toward her position. He looked for 30 seconds, then shook his head at this range in this light. Against this rock face, she was invisible. She had chosen her position specifically to be invisible. But he was smart. She could see his smartness in the way he began to reorganize. He was pulling the northern element back, redistributing them to cover the positions, taking away her angle. He was adapting. Give him 10 minutes and she'd lose the geometry on the northern approach entirely, and the western element would have its full weight to bring to bear on the SEAL's most compromised side. She had to be faster than his adaptation. She found the northern element's second machine gunner, already moving to a new position, not yet settled, and took the shot while he was moving because a target in motion was still a target, and sometimes you didn't have the luxury of a stationary problem. Shot 3. She was already moving her own position by 8 inches, the slight shift that changed her profile against the rock and would ruin any triangulation they were trying to run on her muzzle flash. Wicks had called it thinking like the bullet, understanding yourself as a system being targeted just as much as you were targeting. Her radio crackled again. Reyes this time, and his voice was strange, something between relief and something she couldn't name. Maya, I don't know if you can hear me, but Martinez just told Delaney he thinks they might make it. A pause. He said there's a ghost on the Eastern Ridge. That's what he called you. He said there's a ghost on the Eastern Ridge, and she just bought us time. Maya Rodriguez lined up shot number 4 and did not feel like a ghost at all. She felt like exactly who she was. She felt like the woman who had studied these mountains for 11 days because someone had to, the woman who had memorized every topographic line and every notation marked inaccessible, and had known with the particular quiet certainty that had always been her most reliable weapon that the Eastern Ridge was not inaccessible. It was just hard. She exhaled and fired, and the rifle said exactly what she told it to say. Below her, 24 men were still alive. Shot 5 dropped a fighter who had been working his way up the eastern slope, not toward her. Not yet, but moving with too much purpose in too deliberate a direction for her to let it continue. He was a scout. She understood that before she pulled the trigger, and she pulled it anyway because a scout who reached a vantage point became something worse than a scout. The enemy commander saw it happen. She watched his reaction from 900 feet up and understood that she had just become his primary problem. He was gesturing, now animated in a way he hadn't been before, sending runners in 3 directions simultaneously. The western element slowed its push against the SEAL's position, not stopped, slowed, because he was redirecting attention upward, toward the Eastern Ridge, toward the place his maps told him was inaccessible, and his dead men were telling him otherwise. Smart men adapted. Smart men also made mistakes when they adapted too fast, when certainty got replaced by urgency, and urgency made them commit resources before they understood the full geometry of what they were dealing with. Maya watched him make that mistake in real time. He sent 12 fighters toward the eastern base, 12 fighters to flush 1 sniper out of a position that required a nearly 2,000-foot climb to reach, 12 fighters who would spend 40 minutes on that climb minimum, and who would announce their position with every footfall on loose rock, because loose rock was what the lower eastern face was made of. She'd climbed it. She knew exactly how much noise it made. She had 40 minutes minimum. She went back to work. Martinez's voice came over the radio at 012:19, and the change in it was something she felt physically. Kestrel 7 actual. Northern pressure has dropped by roughly 40%. We are consolidating our western position. 4 of my men are still combat effective on the northern approach. I need to know if that eastern asset is confirmed friendly. Delaney's response was 8 seconds coming. 7, that asset is... Another pause longer, the sound of a man revising something mid-sentence. That asset is confirmed friendly. She heard it. The way he said it, the way confirmed friendly came out like a sentence that cost him something to complete. She filed it away without feeling anything about it because there was work to do and feelings were a later problem. Shot 6 was the Western Element's most aggressive forward fighter. A man who had pushed his position 30 meters closer to the SEALs than any other enemy asset and was about to do something with that proximity that she wasn't going to let him do. He went down between one breath and the next. Shot 7 was opportunistic, a fighter running between 2 positions exposed for less than 4 seconds, and she almost didn't take it, almost let it go because the margin was thin and she was managing her rounds. But he was running toward the Western Element's command position, and command positions communicated, and communication was what kept coordinated, pressure coordinated. She took the shot. Ghost on the eastern ridge just dropped another one, Martinez said over the radio, and there was something in his voice that she would later realize was the specific quality of a man who had accepted that he was going to die and was now accepting with equal difficulty that he might not. Kestrel, that is 7 confirmed kills from the eastern ridge, 7 from a position your intelligence assessed as inaccessible. This time Delaney didn't respond at all. Reyes came back on her private frequency at 012:31. Maya, the TOC is going insane. Delaney's got 2 people trying to figure out who's on that ridge. Owusu's not talking. The only person who knows for certain is Martinez, and Martinez is a little too busy staying alive to care about the paperwork. A pause. You're at 7 confirmed. I've been running the math on their formation from the radio traffic. Their Western Element is starting to hesitate. You're not just taking bodies, you're taking their confidence. That was the real target. It had always been the real target. A rifle didn't win a battle by killing, it won by making the enemy uncertain. Uncertainty was the weapon. Every fighter she dropped was a message to the ones still standing. You cannot see where this is coming from. You cannot predict when it will happen next. You are not as safe as you thought you were. That uncertainty was a living thing, and it spread through a formation the way cold spread through a body from the extremities inward until it reached something vital. She had planted it in the Northern Element. Now she was growing it in the West. She shifted her position again, the 3rd shift in 40 minutes, because staying too long in one place was how snipers got found, and the 12 fighters working up the eastern base were making enough noise now that she could track their progress by sound. They were good, patient, disciplined, not panicking, but they were working against physics. The eastern face punished impatience, and it punished overconfidence, and it didn't much care what side you were on. She had maybe 25 minutes before they reached viable firing range. 25 minutes was enough time for a great deal. Shot 8 changed the shape of the battle. She'd identified him 20 minutes earlier, but had been waiting, patient reading for the right moment, the right angle, the confirmation she needed. The Western Element's field commander was a careful man who kept himself well behind his forward fighters and moved unpredictably between covered positions. He was good. In a different context, she would have professionally admired him, but he had a habit, a small involuntary habit that she'd watched through the scope long enough to map every time one of his fighters reported contact. He turned his head slightly to the right before he responded. It was a tell, a tiny physical grammar that his body produced without his permission. She waited for one of his fighters to fire. He turned his head. She was already exhaling. Shot 8. The Western Element's field commander went down, and for 30 seconds she counted them. The Western approach went silent, not suppressed, not cautious. Silent. 30 seconds where nobody moved and nobody fired, and the men who remained looked at each other and asked a question with their eyes that none of them wanted to answer out loud. Martinez's voice cracked over the radio with a raw edge she hadn't heard before. Kestrel, the western push just stopped. It just stopped. What is happening on that ridge? 7, maintain your, I know what you're going to tell me to do. Martinez cut through Delaney's response in a way that junior officers did not cut through captains, the way men cut through protocol, when protocol had stopped being relevant to survival. I'm not asking for instructions. I'm telling you what I'm seeing. Someone just shot their western commander at approximately 1,000 meters from an elevated position, and their entire western element has gone into confusion. I need to know who is up there so I can coordinate. Silence from the TOC. Then a voice Maya didn't expect. Owusu. On the command channel, his voice measured and deliberate and carrying the weight of a decision he'd made quietly and was now making loudly. 7 actual, the asset on the Eastern Ridge, is Corporal Maya Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. Qualified marksman, sniper credential, 9 years operational. She is acting without authorization. A brief pause. She is also the reason your Western element just stopped moving. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Maya found herself counting again, a habit she couldn't turn off. Martinez's response was 4 words. Get her a radio. Her primary radio frequency changed 30 seconds later. Reyes is doing she suspected Reyes, who had 2 years of watching her and understanding her and knowing without being told exactly what she needed before she needed it. The new frequency put her directly on SEAL 7's tactical net, which meant she could hear everything Martinez was hearing, and Martinez could hear her, and the information that had been moving through 3 intermediaries was now moving directly. Rodriguez, Martinez's voice in her ear was different from the command channel voice. Closer, the exhaustion was more visible, and so was something else, a competence so deeply embedded it had become texture rather than effort. Talk to me about what you're seeing. Western element is in reorganization, she said, because that was what the scope was showing her. Your field commander is down. They're trying to consolidate roughly 75 fighters, still mobile, but nobody's taken command of the forward element yet. You have a window, maybe 8 minutes before someone steps into that gap. What's on the northern approach? Depleted. I've taken their machine gun positions and their radio capability. They're still there, but they're passive watching, not pushing. I think they're waiting for the western element to move first, and it just stopped moving. The eastern slope. She listened to the rock noise below her. 12 fighters working up toward my position. 20 minutes out, maybe. They're good, not great. A pause. What do you need? The question surprised her, not because it was unexpected, but because of how it was asked. Not what can you do, not what's your status. What do you need? Ahmad, the question a commander asked when he decided someone was worth coordinating with rather than managing. I need you to create a distraction on your northern approach in about 4 minutes, she said. Controlled fire, make noise, make it look like you're testing their line. I need their reserve element looking north when I take my next shot, because my next shot is going to be visible, and I want their attention somewhere else when it happens. A beat. Who's your next shot? Their commander. Another beat, and this one felt different, the silence of a man recalculating several things at once. You have eyes on their overall commander. Northwestern position, low rock formation, 4-man personal element. He's been managing the whole engagement on from there. He's the reason this has been as coordinated as it has. You take him out, you have a formation that's going to operate on momentum and instinct, and momentum and instinct make mistakes. Distance, 1,140 meters. Crosswind at 21 from the northwest. Elevation differential of approximately 900 feet. It's a hard shot, but you can make it. She looked through the scope at the man who had been trying to kill 24 people for the last 3 hours with systematic patience and professional calm. She held the image steady. I can make it. Martinez didn't hesitate. 4 minutes. You'll hear us. Those 4 minutes were the quietest of the entire morning. She used them to breathe, to settle, to run the calculations again and again until they stopped being calculations and became something else, something below thought, something the body understood the way it understood balance. She had made 1,100-meter shots before. Not many that distance was at the outer edge of practical range for her platform, the place where small errors in measurement multiplied into large errors in effect. But she had made them. She knew what they required. They required the elimination of everything that was not the shot. She heard the fighters on the eastern slope below her, closer, now making better progress than she'd estimated, perhaps 15 minutes instead of 20. She registered this and set it aside. It would matter after. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the man 900 feet below and 1,100 meters to the northwest. She found him in the scope. He was speaking to his radio operator, the body language of someone receiving a report and processing it, the subtle forward lean of a mind fully engaged with the problem in front of it. She waited. 4 minutes came. Martinez opened up on the northern approach, and it was not the measured, controlled fire distraction she'd asked for. It was everything, every weapon on the northern face firing simultaneously, a roar that rolled across the valley and bounced off the granite walls and made the enemy's reserve element turn north with a collective jerk that she could see even at this distance. And the commander turned his head north too. Just for a moment, just for the half second it took a man to assess a new sound. Maya Rodriguez had spent 9 years training for half seconds. She exhaled. She fired. The valley went strange. That was the only word for it, strange. Not silent, not suddenly peaceful, but strange, the way a room went strange when the largest sound in it abruptly ceased. The enemy commander had been the organizing principle of everything that had happened in that valley for 3 hours, and with him gone, the formation didn't collapse so much as lose coherence the way a sentence lost meaning when you removed its verb. Fighters looked at each other. Runners went to positions they no longer needed. The reserve element, which had been prepared to commit southwards, stopped preparing and started waiting for instructions that weren't going to come from the source they expected. Martinez's voice in her ear was tight with something she thought might be the tactical version of amazement. "Rodriguez, tell me he's down." "He's down." A sound on the other end that was not quite a breath and not quite a word. "Their reserve is frozen," she said. "You have, I don't know how long, minutes. What do you need from me?" "Northern approach. Can you collapse it?" She was already tracking. The northern element, already passive, already depleted, was going to be the key to the SEAL's only viable exit. The northeastern corridor that had been blocked for 3 hours by the original PKM positions she'd dismantled. Without the commander, without the western push, without the machine guns, the northern element was holding a line by habit and not by instruction. "I can make it very uncomfortable for them," she said. "But Rodriguez? But Akian, the 12 fighters on my slope are approximately 12 minutes out." She said it without drama because it was just information and drama didn't help. "When they reach viable range, I have to deal with them. I won't be able to maintain pressure on the northern element and manage my own position simultaneously." Martinez went quiet for 3 seconds. She could hear the battle in the background, still fierce on the western approach, still dangerous but different now without its command structure. "Understood. Do the northern approach. I'll find you 12 minutes. She didn't ask how. She went back to work. Shots 9 through 14 happened in a span of 6 minutes and 20 seconds. She was not counting them as separate events anymore. She was operating in a different state now, the state that her instructors had described, and that she had only fully understood the first time she'd entered it, a place where the calculations happened below consciousness and the decisions came out the other side already made. She was reading the northern element, tracking their movements, anticipating the places they would go, and putting rounds there before they arrived. 2 fighters who tried to re-establish a machine gun position. A radio operator attempting to reach the now silent command frequency. A forward scout who had been sent by whom? She couldn't tell. There was no clear command structure anymore toward the northeastern corridor. The northeastern corridor stayed open. At 013:07, Martinez came back on the frequency, and his voice had changed again in a way she was beginning to understand. Each change marked a new threshold. Crossed a new thing, survived that had seemed unsurvivable 40 minutes before. "Rodriguez, we have movement in the northeast. I'm sending Kowalski and Bream with the 3 walking wounded. If the corridor holds, it'll hold," she said. "Go. The rest of us, I know what the rest of you are doing," she said. "Go now, while the north is still passive. A beat. You have 8 minutes before those slope fighters reach your position." "I know. If you need to break contact and move," Martinez. She said his name because sometimes the name was what it took to make a man stop talking and start trusting. "I've been up here for..." 90 minutes, and I have 4 rounds left, and 12 people climbing toward me, and I have done harder things than this before 9 in the morning. Move your people. A pause that had a different quality to it. Not reluctance, not concern, but something more like a man recognizing a truth he hadn't fully accepted yet. Understood, Rodriguez, he said quietly. Moving. The next 8 minutes were the loneliest of her life. She heard the fighters below her closer now, close enough that she could distinguish individual movements, the scrape of a boot on granite, the particular silence that meant someone had stopped to look. They were good, patient. They'd figured out approximately where she was, not exactly, not precisely, but close enough that they were moving tactically now instead of just climbing. She had 4 rounds. She had a decision to make. She could break position, pull back along the ridgeline, use the terrain to create distance, make herself a moving problem instead of a static one. That was the defensible choice, the one that kept her alive with the most certainty and kept her rifle available for whatever came after this. Or she could hold. She looked through the scope at the valley below. The SEAL's position was in transition. She could see the movement toward the northeastern corridor, the controlled withdrawal that required the northern approach to stay suppressed for another 3 minutes at minimum. If she pulled back now, the northern element had no reason to stay passive. They would see the pressure lift and they would push, and 3 minutes was enough time for a reinvigorated northern element to close the northeastern corridor before Martinez's people cleared it. 4 rounds, 12 fighters below her. 3 minutes needed. Maya Rodriguez did the math and did not particularly like the answer and accepted it anyway because the math was the math and the alternative was worse. She turned her scope to the northern element and fired round 15, then round 16, directly into the northern approach's 2 most forward positions. Not because she had clean targets, but because the sound of a sniper still working was information. And right now, the information she needed the northern element to have was that the eastern ridge was still dangerous and still watching and still ready to punish anyone who moved toward that corridor. She heard a shout from below her close 40 feet, maybe less, and she shifted hard right along the ledge, and a burst of fire hit the rock where she'd been lying, chips of granite spraying in a way that she felt rather than saw because she was already moving, already putting the ridge's natural geometry between herself and the direction of fire. 14 rounds fired, 17 remaining. Wait, she'd loaded 31. Her hands were already running the count before her mind caught up with what it meant, the automatic inventory of a trained body doing the math faster than conscious thought. 31 rounds, 14 fired, 17 remaining. She'd miscounted in the field. She'd told Martinez she had 4 rounds. She had 17. The relief lasted approximately 1 second, because 17 rounds and 12 fighters at close range on a ridgeline was a problem with a very different geometry than the valley work she'd been doing for the past 90 minutes. Valley work was distance and calculation and patience. This was something else. She heard Martinez in her ear faint now, distance and terrain degrading the signal. Rodriguez northeastern corridor is clear. I say again, corridor is clear. First element is through. We are moving to extract position. A pause, well. Rodriguez, what is your status? She pressed herself flat against the rock, listening, tracking the movements below her by sound. 3 distinct positions, the 12 fighters had split into subgroups, which meant they were disciplined, which meant this was going to be exactly as difficult as it sounded. Rodriguez? Martinez's voice sharper now. Talk to me. I'm here, she said. I'm managing a situation. That's not a status. That's the status you're getting right now. A burst of fire from below, closer than before, and she heard the rock to her left take impacts, and she was moving before the sound registered, rolling right, bringing the M40 up. And the fighter who came over the ledge edge 4 feet in front of her had not expected her to be moving toward him, and that half second of recalibration was all she needed and all she used. Round 15. She was back behind cover before the sound finished echoing. Rodriguez, Martinez's voice had gone very still. Are you in close contact? Working on it, she said. We are 300 meters from extract position. I have 9 men still mobile. If you can hold your position for another 6 minutes. I've got 17 rounds and 11 problems, she said. I'll be here. The radio went quiet and she listened to the mountain, and the mountain told her exactly where the next 3 fighters were, and she was already moving to meet them when the sound of rotors, distant, growing unmistakable, broke across the ridge from the south. 8 hours, Delaney had said. It had been 4 hours and 11 minutes. Martinez's voice came back, and this time it cracked clean through the exhaustion and the control and everything else. Rodriguez, air support is inbound. 6 minutes out, 6 minutes. She looked at the 11 fighters between her and the valley below. 6 minutes was going to require a conversation. She set her jaw, found the next position by sound, and started talking in the only language the mountain understood. 6 minutes. She said the number to herself once, not as a prayer and not as a countdown, but as a fact with edges, something solid she could work with. 6 minutes was 360 seconds. At her current rate of engagement, 360 seconds was either plenty or nothing, depending entirely on what the 11 fighters on the eastern slope decided to do in the next 90 seconds before she could fully reposition. They decided to push. She heard it before she saw it, the specific change in sound that happened when people stopped being cautious and started being committed the way careful movement gave way to purposeful movement. And purposeful movement had a different rhythm, faster and less patient, the rhythm of men who had heard rotors and understood that their window was closing and were going to use what remained of it. 3 of them came up the left flank simultaneously. She dropped 2, and the third went back over the edge the way he'd come, which was not the same as gone, but was temporarily equivalent. She was already moving using the ridge's broken terrain the way she'd been using it for the last 20 minutes, not as cover to hide behind, but as geography to think with a set of angles and distances and lines of sight that she had memorized in the first 10 minutes after arriving and was now spending like currency. Round 16. Round 17. Rodriguez. Martinez on the radio, 9 men and 300 meters, and everything riding on the next 4 minutes. Talk to me. Still here. She found a crack between 2 granite faces and pressed into it, giving herself a sliver of coverage on both approaches. 9 fighters remaining on my slope. They're pushing. 2 dead, 1 withdrew. Air support is 4 minutes out. They're asking for a target package. Tell them the valley floor, northern and western quadrants, any moving element that isn't in the northeastern corridor. I'll handle the slope myself. A beat. Rodriguez, 9 fighters. Martinez, same as before the name, the stop, the trust. What's your extract status? 200 meters, we're moving. Then move faster. She heard him almost say something else and then not say it, and then the radio went back to the sound of men running. The thing about close-range work that nobody who hadn't done it fully understood was that it was not the opposite of long-range work. It wasn't simpler or more brutal or less skilled. It was a different language spoken by the same mind, and the transition between them required a specific kind of mental gear shift that she had practiced and practiced until it was automatic, the recalibration of distance, of margin of acceptable error, which shrank from inches to fractions when the target was 40 feet away instead of 1,100 meters. She made that shift now fully, completely, without looking back at the valley below, where her rifle had spent the last 2 hours speaking in its long, precise, unhurried language. Now it was going to speak differently. The 2 fighters who came over the right approach came together, a coordinated move, one drawing fire while the other advanced, and it was a good tactic, and it would have worked against most people. Maya had been trained by a woman who said if it would work against most people, learn to not be most people. She let the advanced man come all the way to the top of the ledge before she moved, which meant she was inside both their decision loops when she came out of the crack, and the advanced man's momentum was already committed in the wrong direction. Round 18, round 19, 9 fighters became 7. Her hands were steady. That was the thing she always came back to when she tried to understand herself, not pride, just observation, clinical and honest. Her hands were steady in a way that went beyond training. She'd been told by 3 different instructors across 9 years and 2 combat deployments that steadiness under pressure was a thing you could not teach. You either had it or you managed without it. She had never fully understood what they meant until she watched other people try to manufacture it under fire and saw the difference. 7 fighters, roughly 2 minutes of ascent remaining, 17 rounds minus 2, 15 rounds, 4 minutes until air support. Reyes, she clicked to the secondary frequency, the one that had been hers and Reyes' private channel, since before she could remember, the one she'd used more times than she could count. for things that couldn't go through official channels. "Danny, you there?" "I'm here." His voice was raw. He'd been listening to the whole engagement. She understood that he'd been sitting in that secondary comms room for 4 hours and 11 minutes and hearing everything and being how able to do nothing, which was its own kind of combat. "I've been here the whole time." "When air support touches down in that valley," she said, keeping her voice flat and task-focused because emotion was a later problem, "I need someone to tell them there are still fighters on the eastern slope. If they don't know and they land hot—" "I'll tell them," Reyes said immediately. "I'll be on that frequency before the birds are over the ridge." "Maya, don't," a silence. "Don't what?" "Whatever you were going to say. Save it." "I was going to say you're an idiot." "Save that too." She heard movement below her, the 7 fighters regrouping, she thought changing their approach pattern, which meant they were still thinking and still dangerous. Stay on that frequency, Danny." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She clicked back to Martinez's net. The next fighter came alone, and that was what told her the dynamic on the slope had changed. Alone meant either one of two things. Either he'd been sent ahead as a deliberate sacrifice to locate her position, or the group had fragmented and was operating individually, which meant command cohesion had broken down. She watched him come slower than the others, had more careful the movement of a man who understood exactly how dangerous this piece of ground was, and she gave him the same professional respect she'd given every target she'd ever engaged, which was to say, she did not hate him and did not dismiss him, and ended the threat with the minimum necessary engagement. Round 20, 6 remaining fighters. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Martinez came on the net, and his voice was doing something new. She could hear people running in the background, hear the percussive sound of sustained fire, hear the specific quality of a man commanding under movement. "Rodriguez, we are 100 meters from extract. I have 5 men down, 2 KIA, 3 to IA, all 3 to IA are mobile. 9 of us walking out of this valley." A pause fractional. 9 Pierschweimer. 30 minutes ago, I thought I was walking out with nobody. She didn't answer because the next 2 fighters came over the ridge simultaneously from different angles, and she needed both hands and both eyes and everything else she had. Round 21. The miss, she couldn't afford rock hit 6 inches wide. She adjusted for a wind shift she'd felt in the last 3 seconds. Round 22. 1 fighter down, 1 retreated. She was bleeding from somewhere, her left forearm. She thought a rock fragment from round 21's near miss, and she registered it the way she registered the win as information to account for and move past. 5 fighters, 2 minutes 45 seconds. The radio exploded, not literally, but Martinez's net went from controlled and purposeful to something else entirely in the space of 4 words from a voice she didn't recognize. One of the SEALs on the extract route, a man whose voice had the high-taught quality of someone reporting something he couldn't quite believe. "Contact south, large element. South of the extract corridor, they're cutting us off. The voice broke for half a second. "There are at least 30 fighters. They came out of nowhere. They are cutting off the corridor right now." The reserve element. Maya went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the mountain temperature. The reserve element, the 30 or 40 fighters she'd identified in the southern sector, the ones the commander had been preparing to commit before she dropped him. Without the commander's direction, she'd assumed they would stay passive. She'd read them as frozen, waiting for orders. She'd been wrong. Someone in that reserve element had understood what the loss of the commander meant, and instead of freezing, they'd moved. Not toward the SEAL's original position, not toward the northern or western elements that were now depleted and disorganized. They'd moved to the extract corridor, the one place that mattered, the throat of the only way out. "Rodriguez." Martinez's voice had gone flat in a particular way, the flatness of a man looking at a very bad problem with very clear eyes. "You heard that?" "I heard it. I need options." She was already doing the math she didn't want to do. From her position on the eastern ridge, the southern sector of the valley was partially visible. Not fully the ridge, geometry didn't allow full coverage, but enough. Enough to see the movement Martinez's man was describing. Enough to understand its shape. 30 fighters between the SEALs and the only exit, and 5 fighters between her and any ability to do anything about it. "Give me 90 seconds, she said. She put down the radio and went to work on the 5. What happened in the next 90 seconds was something she did not fully reconstruct until later. Not because she couldn't remember it, but because the memory of it came in pieces, rather than sequence the way intensely compressed experience always did. She remembered the footing granite that punished imprecision and rewarded the understanding that when the margin for error was zero, you stopped thinking about margin for error and you just moved. She remembered rounds 23 and 24, both at under 30 meters. She remembered the fighter who came from directly above her, which should have been impossible, which meant he'd climbed above her position somehow in the confusion, which was either very good fieldcraft or very good luck. And she remembered that she had 1 second to decide between two options, and she picked the harder one because the harder one kept her rifle intact, and the rifle was what Martinez needed in the next 60 seconds more than he needed anything else. Round 25. 4 minutes and 31 seconds after telling Martinez she'd handle the slope herself, she was alone on the eastern ridge. 12 fighters had started up. None remained. She didn't let herself feel anything about that number. Later, always later, she went to the scope, found the southern sector, and looked at the 30 fighters cutting across the extract corridor. 10 rounds left. Martinez. She was already calculating as she spoke. Distance from her current position to the southern sector was longer than anything she'd fired today, approximately 1,250 meters, and the angle was less favorable, and her left arm was bleeding, and she hadn't stopped to deal with it. I have eyes on the southern element. 30 fighters, give or take. They are at the mouth of the corridor. Can you do anything from your position? I can do something. I can't do everything. She settled controlling the bleeding arm by controlling the thought of it. If you push hard at the corridor from the north right now while I'm hitting them from above, their response is going to be split. Split attention at 30 meters is enough. It has to be enough. I have 9 men. 3 of them are wounded. I know. She was looking at the formation through the scope, reading it, the way she'd read the northern element that morning, the way she'd read the commander finding the architecture of the threat. Their lead element, front 4 fighters, they're the ones physically blocking the corridor. I can take 2 of the 4 before they identify the angle of fire. That gives you a window. How big a window? Small, she said. It'll be small. Silence for 2 seconds. She could hear Martinez breathing, hear the sounds of 9 men holding still and waiting for a decision. This was what command actually was, not the briefings and the maps and the deliberate certainty, but this, the moment where you held an incomplete set of facts in a shrinking clock and you decided. On your shot, Martinez said. She exhaled and fired. Round 26 took the left flank blocker. Round 27 was already in the chamber when the southern element's heads came up looking for the source, and they looked west. She'd anticipated that the wind was from the northwest and muzzle report would diffract along the valley wall. In a way that pointed west rather than east, she'd factored it in. She'd been factoring it in since she took the ridgeline position 4 hours ago. Round 27 took the right flank blocker. Go. She was already tracking the next target and saying it simultaneously. Martinez, go right now. She heard him go. She heard 9 men moving, heard the brief violence of close engagement as the southern element responded to the sudden push from the north, heard the radio fill with the controlled chaos of men fighting at 20 meters in a narrow corridor, heard individual voices she'd been listening to for 2 hours now, doing the last difficult thing between themselves and survival. Rounds 28 and 29 were area suppression. She was not taking aim shots at identified targets. She was making the southern element's rear position dangerous, creating a threat from above that forced them to manage 2 directions, front and high, and managing 2 directions is always harder than managing one, always without exception. The corridor opened. We're through. A voice she didn't know, rough with exertion. We're through. We are through. The corridor, all 9 are through. The sound Martinez made on the radio was not a word. It was the sound a man made when the thing he had stopped believing was possible became simply true. She heard the helicopters before she saw them. 2 Blackhawks coming in low and fast from the south. The sound of them filling the valley like a second battle, and she watched the southern element break away from the corridor and scatter, because helicopters meant a different kind of problem than infantry, and the southern element was making the correct tactical decision, which was to be somewhere else. She had 2 rounds left. She did not fire them. The math didn't require it anymore, and she had learned a long time ago that the rounds you didn't fire were sometimes as important as the ones you did. Martinez's voice came back, and it was quieter now, the specific quiet of a man who'd been running on extreme operational stress for 4 hours and was now standing somewhere that wasn't actively trying to kill him, which created a silence in the body that almost felt wrong. "Rodriguez, what's your status?" "I'm on the ridge," she said. "I have 2 rounds and a cut on my left arm that I haven't looked at yet." "How bad?" "I'll look at it in a minute." "Look at it now," she almost argued. Then she looked at it. It was a 4-inch laceration from a rock fragment, deep enough to need stitches, but not deep enough to explain the amount of blood which had dried dark against her sleeve and made it look worse than it was. "It needs stitches. I've had worse." "I believe you." A pause. "Are you mobile? Can you get off that ridge?" "I got up it. I can get down it." "Rodriguez." He stopped. She could hear something working in his voice, some recalibration happening in real time. When he spoke again, it was differently, not as a SEAL team leader managing a tactical asset, but as a man trying to say something true. "I've been in this work for 13 years. I have never," he stopped again. "I need you to understand that what you did today, Martinez." "What?" "Let me get off this mountain first." A sound that might have been a laugh compressed into something smaller by the weight of the last 4 hours. "Copy that. Get off the mountain. Kestrel Base is sending a vehicle to the eastern base. Tell them it's a long walk down. I'll tell them to wait." She clicked off the radio and looked at the valley below her one last time. The helicopters were on the ground. She could see them, 2 black shapes in the eastern quarter, SEALs loading the organized urgency of a force that was battered and depleted and getting out while the window held. The western element had dissolved without its field commander, without the overall commander, without the pressure of the push it had been part of. It had become individual men making individual decisions, and most individual men made the same individual decision when the thing they'd been pushing against suddenly stopped being pushable. The northern approach was silent. The southern element was scattered and retreating. The valley that had been organized murder 4 hours ago was becoming just a valley again. Maya Rodriguez sat on the eastern ridge for 30 seconds and let herself breathe like a person instead of a machine, and then she picked up her rifle and started down the mountain. The descent was harder than the climb. It was always harder than the climb. Her first instructor had told her that. Wicks again, the lean Alabama woman with the flat voice and the precise words. "The climb runs on adrenaline and purpose," Wicks had said. "The descent runs on what's left, and what's left is usually less than you think." Her left arm had started hurting properly now that the engagement chemicals were clearing her system. Her legs were telling her things she didn't want to know about the last 2 hours of movement on high-gradient terrain. Her hands, when she looked at them during a rest stop 300 feet below the ridgeline, were shaking slightly, fine motor tremor. Nothing structural, the normal physiological consequence of sustained extreme stress, and she watched them shake for a moment with the clinical detachment of a person observing an interesting phenomenon, then closed them into fists until the shaking stopped, then opened them and kept descending. The radio was quiet, which meant people were doing what needed to be done without her input, which was the correct state of things. She was 400 feet from the valley floor when Reyes came on the secondary frequency. "They're out," he said. "All 9, both birds are airborne. They're coming back for the KIA recovery." A pause. "Maya, all 9 made it." She stopped on the rock face and held that information in the specific part of herself where she kept things that mattered. 9 men who had been 24 hours from dying in a valley, 4 hours from running out of ammunition and options. 9 men in 2 helicopters over the Afghan mountains going somewhere that was not that valley. She had started this morning with 31 rounds and a decision that was going to cost her everything she'd spent 9 years building. She was coming down a mountain with 2 rounds left and a cut on her arm, and shaking hands and the kind of tired that lived in places that sleep didn't reach, and 24 men were alive. The math, when she looked at it that way, was perfectly clear. "Tell them." Her voice came out rougher than she intended, the roughness of a person who had been mostly silent for 4 hours except for tactical communication, the roughness of a body that had been something other than a person for 4 hours and was converting back. "Tell them I said 24 is a good number." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "They're saying 31 is the number that matters." Martinez told it to the aircrew before the birds lifted. Said 31 shots, 900 feet up, 200 enemy, 4.5 hours. Said it like he wanted the crew to write it down. She didn't say anything. "Maya, Delaney is waiting at the base." There it was. She'd known it was coming, had known it since 0917 when she walked out of that secondary comms room with her rifle in her pack in the complete understanding of what it was going to cost her. Courts-martial, insubordination, 9 years of service in a record that had been until this morning without a single formal mark against it. Delaney had said, "I don't care if she's the last breathing Marine on this mountain," and that level of certainty didn't dissolve because the outcome had been good. If anything, it hardened because men like Delaney read the outcome as incidental to the principle, and the principle was authority, and she had broken it. She knew all of that. She kept ascending. The vehicle was there when she reached the base of the slope, a standard tactical truck engine running Reyes behind the wheel with the particular expression he wore when he was managing multiple difficult feelings simultaneously and not managing them particularly well. She climbed in. He didn't say anything, which was the right call, because she wasn't ready for anything that required response. She set the M40 between her knees and looked at the road ahead. They were 2 minutes from the FOB when Reyes spoke. Martinez called Kestrel Base on the command net from the bird. She looked at him. He called Kestrel Base and asked to speak to the base commander. Not Delaney, Colonel Harrison. Reyes kept his eyes on the road. He told Harrison what happened. Everything. The Eastern Ridge, the authorization denial, Owusu, all of it. He gave Harrison the shot count, 31 rounds, 14 enemy KEK, a confirmed multiple additional combat ineffective, 1 enemy commander, 2 field commanders. A pause. Then he said something else. What? He said he wanted it on the record that Corporal Maya Rodriguez saved the lives of every man on SEAL Team 7, and that whatever action Captain Delaney intended to take against her needed to go through him first. His words. Reyes finally looked at her briefly, then back at the road. He also said, and this is a direct quote because Owusu was listening and wrote it down, he said, "Whatever she gets court-martialed for, I want to testify that the Marine Corps has a broken system if it can't find a use for what I watched her do today." Maya looked at the mountains through the windshield for a long time. She had not done what she'd done this morning for the recognition. She had done it because the math required it, because 24 lives were a fact and her orders were an opinion, and she had always known, with the quiet certainty that had gotten her in trouble since she was 20 years old, which of those things outweighed the other. But the weight of Martinez's words landed somewhere anyway, in the place where she kept things that mattered. What did Harrison say? Reyes almost smiled. Almost. He said he'd meet her at the gate. The FOB came into view ahead of them, and through the windshield she could see 2 figures waiting, one she recognized as Delaney, the posture of a man prepared to deliver consequences rigid and certain even at a distance, and one she recognized as Colonel Harrison, who was a different kind of man, entirely a man who had been in this work for 25 years and understood with the particular clarity of someone who had seen enough to know what mattered, that the soldier getting out of that truck had just rewritten something. She had 2 rounds left in her rifle. She had a 4-inch cut on her left arm. She had shaking hands that she was going to close into fists before she got out of that truck, and she was going to walk to that gate with the same steadiness she'd carried up 900 feet of granite in 22-mile-an-hour wind, because the mountain was behind her now, and this was a different kind of terrain, and she was going to read it the same way she read everything. One fact at a time. The review took 11 days. 11 days during which Maya Rodriguez reported to her assigned duties, cleaned her rifle every morning, ate in the same mess hall as Delaney without looking at him, and waited with the same stillness she had brought to the Eastern Ridge, not passive, not resigned, but the stillness of a person who had done what needed to be done and was prepared to live with every version of what came next. Reyes checked in daily. Owusu said nothing and documented everything. Clearwater's hearing remained formally suspended, pending the review outcome. Delaney spoke to no one about it, which was somehow louder than anything he could have said. On the 12th morning, Harrison called her into his office. She stood in front of his desk and waited. "The review is complete," he said. He didn't make her stand there long. Harrison was not a man who used other people's uncertainty as a management tool. "The disciplinary proceedings against you have been formally suspended, not dismissed, suspended. The distinction matters." He looked at her directly. "There are people at levels above this command who believe what you did was necessary. There are also people who believe that necessity does not dissolve the command structure you violated, and that allowing it to go without formal consequence creates a precedent with serious implications. I understand that, sir. Both of those things are true simultaneously, he said. That's the honest version of where this lands. He paused. What is not suspended, what has been formally entered into your service record, effective as of this morning, is a commendation for valor, signed by JSOC, endorsed by the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He slid a single sheet across the desk. Your own chain of command will be adding to that record in the coming weeks. I'll see to it personally. She looked at the paper, but didn't pick it up yet. Martinez asked about you, Harrison said. He called this morning before I called you in. He wanted to know if you were all right. Something moved through her that she didn't name. What did you tell him? I told him you were exactly all right. Harrison almost smiled, the smallest version of a smile, the kind that lived in the eyes rather than the mouth. He said that was what he figured. She picked up the commendation. Read it once. Set it back down on his desk. Sir, the Eastern Ridge Assessment, the notation that called it inaccessible. Being corrected in the operational record as of today, Harrison said, along with every other notation in that sector that was based on the winter reconnaissance. He held her gaze. Your analysis has been formally entered as the replacement assessment. Your name is on it. She stood in Harrison's office and held that quietly for one moment, the weight of it, the specific and irreversible fact of it, and then she set it in the place where she kept things that mattered, alongside Martinez's words on a helicopter, and Owusu's decision in a comms room, Antilles and Navarro and Reyes, and every quiet act of people who had chosen the right thing when choosing it cost them something real. She picked up her cover from under her arm, settled it, and looked at Harrison one last time. Thank you, sir. She walked out of his office into the Afghan morning rifle on her shoulder, 8 stitches in her left arm, and 31 rounds written permanently into the record of what one person could do when the math was clear and the decision was made, and the mountain said impossible, and she said otherwise. Nobody called her Shadow Walker anymore. They didn't call her anything. They just got out of her way.